Ronna Mcdaniel, the recently outed chair of the RNC, was bizarrely hired by MSNBC for whatever reason and also gave them a Meet the Press interview where she said some really interesting things, from admitting that Trump did indeed force her outing to saying January 6ers shouldn't be freed like Trump wants. And I wanted to take a look at just a few of these to kind of see where MSNBC's newest hires' headspace is at. Let's start with them discussing whether or not it was Trump behind her decision to step down from the RNC.
Were you pushed out of your role?
Well, there's no question that as RNC chair, you have to remain neutral. And we had a primary process. And so we did have debates, right? We had debates and there was tension and a little friction that started during that process. It was well played out in the media. And I knew at that point when I was doing that role and we were going to have debates that when the nominee came forward and it was likely to be President Trump, that they would want to switch. And that's his right as nominee.
And so were you pushed out by him?
He absolutely wanted me to move aside and wanted Michael Whatley and Lara Trump to come in.
And when you're hearing this, you have to remember how unprecedented it is to have someone outed and then replace them with your family. And Michael Whatley is also a strong election denier, so it's not like he's much better of a choice. It's almost certainly done by Trump to keep an ear within the party where he feels like he's kind of losing the grasp in terms of his polarization. And he also, it's not going to hurt him to be able to dip into the RNC bank for his legal troubles. For the longest time, Ronna Mcdaniel was kind of leaving this question up in smoke as to, was I forced out? Was I asked to step aside by Trump? Or was it my own volition that I stepped down? And now it's interesting that she is making it clear, though one does have to wonder about motive, regardless of what kind of answer she was to give in an interview like this. She's now talking to her new boss in a way, so it's definitely weird. But I do want to also note the hilarious absurdity in her trying to act as if she remained neutral during the primaries, where she asked Haley to step down numerous times, also urged other candidates to do it multiple times, and it's like neutral where. Moving on, however, Ronna voicing her own disagreement with Trump's consistent vow to free January 6ers.
Do you disagree with Trump saying he's going to free those who've been charged?
I do not think people who committed violent acts on January 6th should be freed.
So you disagree with that? He's been saying that for months. Ronna, why not speak out earlier? Why just speak out about that now?
When you're the RNC chair, you kind of take one for the whole team, right? Now I get to be a little bit more myself, right? This is what I believe. I don't think violence should be in our political discourse, Republican or Democrat.
What she really means is when you're in Trump's party, you either toe the line or he gets you out of the way. Look at all the people in his administration in 2020 that wouldn't play into his election interference nonsense that he just quickly wrote off, from Bill Barr to Mike Pence, trusted allies and lifelong Republicans of whom Trump and his base quickly labeled as rhinos and tossed aside the second they wouldn't do his bidding. And I suggest that the same is true for Ronna Mcdaniel. There was probably an asking of some sort of RNC funds, and when the buck had to stop there, it was time for Trump to get someone who wasn't going to push back to anything he says, because complete control is what Trump likes. And in this day and age where MAGA controls the Republican Party from within, representing a true tyrannical minority, all Trump has to do is ask and he shall receive.
But you got on the phone with her, with the then president of the United States. How can anyone see that as anything other than
to change your vote?
But you said, do not sign it. If you can go home tonight, do not sign it. How can people read that as anything other than a pressure campaign?
No, the pressure was being put on them from the hours and hours of threats and abuse they were receiving that coerced them to change their vote. And they shouldn't have had to deal with that.
But if they're on the phone with you and Donald Trump, who was then the president of the United States,
I was not telling them to do anything. What I'm saying is I support you voting your conscience.
Do you, knowing what you know now, do you regret making that phone call, Ronna?
I regret the fact that people are being threatened for doing their job in this country. I think it's wrong to say, I want a simple audit, and to have your family be threatened, your daughter be threatened, your livelihood be threatened, being called racist.
Most of this is just straight up lies. She's referring to her and Trump pressuring Michigan officials to overturn their electoral votes on what reflected the true votes of their districts. We know that when hundreds of threats were made towards these types of election officials, almost all completely from Trump supporters, on the basis of his fraudulent conspiracies that he was pushing onto them about the election, with no truth, no basis, that couldn't hold up in over 60 court cases. We saw the harassment and the threats that were garnered. I covered it largely on my channel at the hands of Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, who was directly targeted almost the hardest by Trump, only to then be cleared of all wrongdoing in the legal system. Nothing Trump says or does can hold up in the legal system, and that's telling. It's telling that he needs to write off these sorts of institutions, and that his entire base can't trust a single facet of the legal system in America, because none of them wants to justify any of the bullshit that he tries to spin, because none of it has any foundation. And it's sad to see that MSNBC is willing to hire someone who is so clearly so deluded, willing to lie, and worried about self-preservation in her willingness to do so. She's just trying to defend herself, her party, and the man who is largely responsible for her exile from within.